Welcome back to the show, everyone, where we have another special mashup episode put together to celebrate my 3rd year podcasting. It's hard to believe so much time has taken place since we first launched. But when I look around my life, it's crazy to see how much has changed in that short period. As all of our lives continue to evolve in new and interesting ways, first and foremost, I'd like to thank you all for making this podcast a consistent part of your routine. We all have so many choices of what to watch or listen to, things to do and places to be. But 12 million downloads later, and it's also easy for me to see this community for what it is, dedicated to their health and that of their families, curious to learn more and grow as individuals, loving to themselves and the people around them, and ultimately tuned in for the greater good of all. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me on this journey. This year, I really focused on bringing you experts at the very top of their field, resulting in a guest list that we're really proud of and excited to build upon in the future. Here's a glimpse into some of my favorite convos of the season with people I love and admire so much. You can check out the show notes for this episode for links to my full conversations with these guests. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, where this mashup is also available on video. Let's dive right in. First up, we drop into episode 242 with Dr. Jolene Brighten, a pioneer in women's medicine and award-winning board-certified naturopathic endocrinologist and certified sex counselor. 2023 was a big year for sex hormones, and this is one of the year's most insightful and impactful episodes on the subject.
There are so many imbalances that women can deal with, anything from estrogen dominance, low testosterone, low progesterone. And you talk about why women should raise their progesterone levels, but can we kind of break down some of the most common hormone imbalances and what the effects would be in their body and how they might feel?
What we see commonly, if we're talking about cyclical hormones, is there can be imbalances in estrogen and progesterone, especially in the late luteal phase, where progesterone isn't quite as high as we'd like it to be. So estrogen is taking the lead. This often gets called estrogen dominance. And now we're feeling irritable. We're very moody at times. We can have breast tenderness. We can have difficulty falling asleep. There can be, we can be more critical of our partner. We can have more sensory issues. So sound, texture, these kinds of things can be more problematic. That can be happening in that late luteal phase of our cycle. So that is very common. If you are somebody who is in your 40s, you're probably going to experience some of this because you're going to enter perimenopause. And with perimenopause, the ovaries are like, we're just not going to really like bust out these eggs on the regular anymore. Like, we've done it. It was fun. We're over it. And so with that, without regular ovulation, we don't form the corpus luteum, which is where we get progesterone. You have to ovulate to get progesterone. Or the corpus luteum might be like, yeah, we're just like not going to go the distance here for you. And so you can start to have issues with like maybe your cycles getting shorter, you're having spotting on top of all the other things that I shared with you. So those are quite common to see. It's not normal, and they're usually rooted in things like nutrition, lifestyle, namely like how are you eating to fuel the corpus luteum? Are you getting enough antioxidants, vitamin C, B vitamins, but also like stress, detoxification pathways, sleep, that can all play a really big role. We also see high androgens, polycystic ovarian syndrome being the most common condition to see high testosterone, but not always. You cannot have PCOS and still have elevated androgens. You will have oily skin, acne, hair loss on your head. You might notice hair growth on your chin, chest, abdomen. You may have anovulatory cycles or irregular ovulation. And so that could be periods that go missing for months at a time or just show up every now and again. Those are some of the common sex hormone issues that we see. We can definitely talk about thyroid and adrenal, all of that, but in terms of sex hormones, I wanted to stop there and answer that question.
No, that's great. I mean, I think estrogen dominance is something that a lot of people have talked a lot about for a long time. And the focus has always been about detoxifying estrogen, working on liver health, having a plan for gut health to make sure that you're pooping regularly to remove you remove that tagged estrogen instead of allowing it to reabsorb in the body and things of that nature. But no one's really focusing on how we can naturally raise our progesterone levels to balance that out, especially important for women moving into that perimenopause phase that may not realize that their diet and lifestyle is contributing to estrogen dominance and have no idea that there's a way to naturally raise progesterone. So what are your recommendations when it comes to kind of working on that balance, but also like raising progesterone?
Yeah. Okay. So like our society has really normalized drinking alcohol. And I think it's a really normal, natural go-to to be like, I'm stressed, I'm not sleeping, I'm going to have a glass of wine. Or your doctor's like, you're not enjoying sex, have a glass of wine. That alcohol can be really problematic for the ovaries, so ovarian function, but also that can contribute to raising estrogen levels as well. And so that's one of those really easy things to dial back on. And if you're not going to eliminate it all the way, please make a note of how it's making you feel. How was your sleep that night? I know I wear my Oura ring and I drink alcohol and I will see my body temperature is up. My heart rate doesn't lower until later at night. I may have had a drink in the afternoon with a friend and I will see the changes that it affects in my sleep. Anything that's negatively impacting your sleep is also negatively impacting your melatonin. That's going to negatively impact your cortisol. And anything that's negatively impacting cortisol is going to affect your progesterone. So your brain is going to signal to all these hormones. It gets feedback from the body, and it is the master of orchestrating everything that's going on. So your menstrual cycle is actually starting up here in the brain. So with that, it has to make a choice. So we were talking about like, are you safe? If the signals are like you're not safe, there's stress, we've got inflammation, the brain's going to say all hands on deck, let's make cortisol. And this progesterone, not necessary. We're not even safe. We cannot be supporting human life. We don't want to get pregnant. We don't want to maintain a pregnancy. We just want to work over here in making sure that we stay alive. And so working on sleep, working on stress, these are, I say it in the book, like this is the stuff that people are like, oh, that again. I always ask my patients, so you know this, how well are you doing it? The answer is almost universally, I'm not. I'm actually not. And that's a normal part of being a human. We learn things, we integrate them, we're doing them, we got great habits, life happens, we fall off, and then we're like, I know that. Oh, but I'm not doing it anymore. Now, in addition, the ovaries, so the corpus luteum, can benefit from vitamin C. Vitamin C is also fantastic for the adrenal glands. They're one of the highest concentrated tissues of vitamin C because you require it. And you are not going to make it. You're not that kind of mammal. So you've got to take it. And so taking vitamin C, it might be as little as like 500 milligrams on top of your diet, or it might be as much as 4,000 milligrams in divided doses on top of your diet to make sure that you're getting the antioxidant protection that you need. Vitamin B6 and Vitex are also super helpful for keeping those progesterone levels up, taking care of that corpus luteum and helping your body maintain. But like you were saying, you've got to be working on the estrogen piece as well. And you can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to do things for my progesterone without also tending to your estrogen. And as you were saying, taking care of your liver so we get the right metabolites, the best metabolites. We want to make sure that we're eating fiber, maybe taking calcium D-glucarate as well so that we get that healthy movement of estrogen out of our bowels. Drink your water because estrogen also gets removed through your kidneys. So that's another thing that we can be doing. And lastly, something I feel like gets really overlooked is community. And the need for being with your tribe and your people. And if you're like, I don't like peopling, like in my luteal phase, one person, get with one person, but actually having community and feeling support can help you optimize your progesterone levels.
Next, we have Dr. Stephanie Estima from episode 226. Dr. Estima is the founder of Hello Betty, a community centered around female empowerment through health, and the author of Betty Body, a doctor of chiropractic with a special interest in metabolism and female physiology. My conversation with her was all about empowering women to be the best versions of themselves, both physically and emotionally, through the power of easily accessible female health education. At this point in the episode, we're going to deep dive on shifting your diet throughout your cycle.
So if someone is cycling and they're going into phase 2, where they are changing their diet up, they've moving away from the 70-20-10 phase 1 of the Estima diet, and they're moving into what would be more of like a maintenance lifestyle type of diet. How are they eating over their cycle.
Wonderful. So, first week of your cycle for most women, our appetite typically is lower, right? So progesterone is no longer around. First couple of days, especially, you may notice maybe the first day there's like some chocolate, but that might be a magnesium issue, which we can circle back to. But for assuming that you don't have any nutrient deficiencies, first couple of days of your period, you should notice a attenuation or a lowering of your appetite. And so this would be, and I kind of change phase 2 based on who I'm sitting in front of. But as a general rule, in terms of maintenance, I do like to return in this first week where we typically have a lower appetite. I do like it to be more of a ketogenic style where we're kind of clamping down on the carbohydrates. You can have more fat. I always get asked the question, but what if I'm training and what if I'm working out? So it doesn't have to be 70-20-10. You can certainly do like a 60-30-10, right? But the idea is to kind of clamp down on the carbohydrates. You can bump up the protein certainly and pull back on the fat.
Mm-hmm.
As we move into the second week, what we're seeing now from a hormonal perspective is estrogen was very, very low in the beginning of week 1. And then it starts to make its rise, right? It starts to rise towards the end of week 1. And then at the beginning of, kind of mid week 2, around day 10, we do see this like very rapid increase in estradiol. And the reason why that's happening, estrogen is an anabolic hormone. So it is helping to drive the maturation of the follicle. So there's hopefully just one follicle that reaches maturation with the egg inside it. That's the function of estradiol, right? So it's anabolic and it's trying to grow and mature this follicle so that eventually that follicle in a couple of days is going to release an egg. So that estradiol rise is probably about 50 hours or so, following which we see a surge in luteinizing hormone. So luteinizing hormone, I always anthropomorphize everything. So luteinizing hormone is like the crazy uncle that comes in after, Christmas dinner. He's maybe a little bit drunk and he comes because this happened to me once. So this is how I kind of remember it. Like he came to me and he's like, Steph, and like hit me on the back of my neck and like I spit out my food. Right. So that's basically what luteinizing hormone does. It's like it kind of shoots up, right? And then drives the follicle to spit out, if you will, the egg. And that lasts for about there needs to be about a 10-hour surge in luteinizing hormone for that to happen. The other thing that happens in week 2, this is a very important week. So the other thing that happens is we also see the highest levels of testosterone for a woman that we will see throughout for the entire cycle. So as a woman, albeit a crude measurement, one of the ways that you might evaluate whether or not your testosterone levels are where they should be is your interest in and receptivity to sex.
Yeah.
So we will, and I kind of joke, and my partner's name is Giovanni. So I'll be like, yeah, I'm usually like, hey, you looking like a snack over there. Like you look really, really good, because that's just,
he's like, she's ovulating.
Yeah. And he's like, okay, she's ovulating. Exactly. Like, oh, it's that time of month, honey. So you should your interest in your libido, you should be much more interested in whether it's, with a partner, with yourself, whatever. You'll be much more interested in sex and certainly climaxing, and orgasming as well. So I always like to think, and so there's a lot of energy. There's a lot of there's a lot of growth here, right? So obviously testosterone, famous for libido, as we were just mentioning, also really important for muscle mass, for strength, for hair growth. It's involved in personality traits like confidence, our ability to take risks, right? So these are anabolic, these are growth oriented hormones. And if I can just overlay a little bit of maybe a little bit of woo woo, if I can, this is precious energy, right? You are going to notice this week, you're going to feel like you're firing on all cylinders. And really, if you look at it from the brain, you really are. The motor cortex is on fire. This is a great time to start a new, let's say a new gym program, because we have that motor sort of aptitude this week. You will also, from a personality perspective, feel more outgoing. You can people this week, right? You're more extroverted. You're going to want to talk to people, connect, all of that kind of stuff. So I always say, and this is my little woo piece is, this is sacred energy that your body is ability to create in order to ovulate, right? This is the main point of your cycle. It's not to bleed. Everybody thinks that bleeding is like the main thing. The main point of your cycle is to ovulate. So if you do need to, ask for a raise, if you do need to socialize because that's what's been lacking, like use your energy wisely. Like don't waste this energy. It's very precious. That's just that's like my motherly kind of advice, if you will. And in terms of nutrition, we'll just kind of stay here with the nutrition because we have those two really big anabolic hormones that are rising. We have testosterone and estrogen. I really like to almost profit, if you will, from that rise in testosterone by increasing protein. So here is where you'll see me clamp and pull way back on the fat. So it can be like I can half it, like it can come down to like 30 or 40%. The protein usually doubles. So it will go from like a 20% to a 40% this week. And then doubling of the carbohydrates as well. Why do we care about this? Well, as a perimenopausal, if you are in perimenopause or you are thinking about, even if you're in your 30s or your 40s or beyond, one of the things that should be a major concern for you is a preservation of muscle mass. And the way that we do that, there's many ways. There's a couple of ways. Mechanicals like stimulus and stress, which is like you getting in the gym and lifting heavy weights. Yeah, lifting heavy weights. You won't get bulky. We can get to that. And a chemical stressor, right? So a chemical stimulus, which is protein. And this is why I will, talk about this despite people saying the worst things about me around animal protein, is because we have animal-based proteins are very high in an amino acid called leucine, which is kind of the forewoman, if you will, for something called muscle protein synthesis. I know I'm talking to the choir. You're like, yep.
No,
yep,
I'm
no,
smiling and nodding because I want people to hear this from someone other than me. And yes, you bring years of expertise and so many client success stories. So please preach.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the protein is going to drive MPS, right? That muscle protein synthesis, which is just a fancy word for making new muscle proteins. And then the doubling of the carbohydrates also complements that. So when we are consuming carbohydrates, that prevents muscle protein breakdown. Okay. So this is where my women who lost weight by clamping down on the carbohydrates for a long time do really need to get comfortable with consuming carbohydrates over the long term, because the net effect of consuming more protein and more carbohydrates is net, you're going to have more lean muscle mass left at the end of the day. Because when you are going to the gym and you are lifting heavy, you're breaking down your you're breaking down your muscle fibers. So you have to build them back up with recovery and with nutrition, like post-nutrition, like post-workout nutrition. So that's week 2. Then we ovulate, the full moon, if you will. And then we move into kind of the second phase of the cycle, which is the luteal phase, completely different hormonal environment.
Dr. Izabella Wentz was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis in 2009. She's the author of 3 books, an acclaimed thyroid specialist, a licensed pharmacist, and she joined me for episode 246, where we put the spotlight on thyroid health, another popular trending topic for 2023.
So let's say you were taking a 2-pronged approach. Your numbers aren't great. You really are dealing with a lot of symptoms. Your free T3 and T4 aren't in line. You end up deciding to use thyroid medication, but you also know that you have Hashimoto's because, your blood tests come back positive for the antibodies. What can people start to do in their life, knowing that toxins and nutrient deficiencies and our diet and lifestyle play a major role in this? What can people start to do to heal and get on the path to feeling their best?
Some of the things that I really love to start with is food as medicine and addressing some of the imbalances that are present. So most people with Hashimoto's are going to have a ton of nutritional deficiencies, and they're going to have blood sugar issues, and they're going to have food sensitivities. So these 3 things are things that I feel like most people can tackle on their own, or working with a coach, or just getting really educated on. So making sure that all the food that you're eating is clean source, it's organic. We're not eating a lot of inflammatory seed oils. These can definitely contribute to the overall inflammatory load in the body. Foods that are commonly reactive in Hashimoto's are going to be gluten, dairy, and soy. So oftentimes I will recommend a gluten-free diet for most people to start with. About 88% of people with Hashimoto's, even if they don't have celiac disease, do end up feeling better on a gluten-free diet. About 30% of them will be able to reduce their thyroid antibodies within just a few months. Some of them I've seen complete remissions where they just remove gluten within 90 days. I don't have any more antibodies. My thyroid function returned to normal and all of my other symptoms went away. And this does happen for some, right? And then looking at a few key targeted nutrients that may be deficient. So selenium is a really big one, around anywhere from like 83 micrograms to 200 micrograms per day, can reduce the thyroid antibodies by about half in 3 months. It can help with anxiety and hair loss. A lot of times the ladies that start on that are like, okay, I was anxious, I was losing my hair, and it's like, okay, we had raging antibodies, and the selenium can start bringing that down. Myo-inositol is another really, really helpful supplement. The studies are now showing that 600 milligrams of myo-inositol combined with 83 micrograms of selenium can help get Hashimoto's into remission. So just these two things, when you take them over a time period, it can normalize your TSH. Some people may not even need thyroid medications if they're diagnosed in the early stages. And then the thyroid antibodies can get into the remission range. So I love recommending that. And it's myo-inositol is like sweet tasting, and it's like a kind of a nutrient that has a very sweet taste, and it's very, very helpful for not just thyroid antibodies, but also the TSH and for blood sugar balance. Even symptoms like OCD, which is an unknown symptom of early stages of Hashimoto's, can get better with myo-inositol.
First of all, anyone who has Hashimoto's or is like thinking they might be diagnosed with it, that right there I think was like the golden nugget of today's podcast, because so many times they're just like ads on Instagram or someone saying what's worked for them. And this combination, knowing that it's so powerful and it's just nutrients that our body needs to properly function is just amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Can you talk about the difference between myo-inositol and D-chiroinositol?
Sure. And I actually think sometimes using them together may be very helpful. So there is a combination that was studied of D-chiroinositol and myo-inositol for PCOS. And it's incredibly helpful to normalize hormone levels. And specifically, myo-inositol has been studied in Hashimoto's. About 600 milligrams per day is the dose that's being utilized. And some women do find that adding a little bit of D-chiroinositol may actually be helpful as well.
Other than those nutrients and allergens to remove, like gluten, dairy, and soy, can you talk about how blood sugar impacts our thyroid hormones?
Yes. Blood sugar.
I'm like, yes,
one, right?
Let's get to the good stuff.
Such a big one. So blood sugar imbalances, whenever we have, I like to say like blood sugar imbalances, whenever we eat high carb foods, are like throwing fuel on the fire in the autoimmune attack. People will notice that they're more anxious, and they could test their antibodies when they're eating high sugar, high glucose, high carbohydrate containing foods, and that will put them on a blood sugar roller coaster. So this is one of the key things that I recommend is let's balance your blood sugar and get off of gluten when you have Hashimoto's. And people will say like, well, people used to think that I had like bipolar disorder, right? Or I used to be so moody and irritable and hangry. And all we will do is just say like, eat a bit more protein, a bit more fat, and lower your carbohydrate intake. And people just are like, I feel so much more calm. And you can actually test their thyroid antibodies and see that the thyroid antibodies reduce as well. Myo-inositol is helpful for blood sugar imbalances, and that's part of one of the mechanisms of how it works for Hashimoto's. But something like 50% of people with Hashimoto's have impaired carbohydrate tolerance, where they may not know that they have blood sugar issues, but if you do like a CGM, you'll see that you're becoming hypoglycemic or that you're having high blood sugar after eating certain foods. So this is a really, really key component of getting well with Hashimoto's.
Thank you so much for pointing out the fact that it does take high quality proteins and fats to support that. It's not just about lowering our carbohydrate intake. I think that there's a misunderstanding there where people will just bring their carbohydrate load down, but they're not replacing those nutrients with a macronutrient or, nutrient status that really supports their energy levels between meals. And so they're really throwing themselves into low carb purgatory, not going from maybe hypoglycemic swings to low carb purgatory. And it doesn't help the anxiety levels if we're not optimally feeding ourselves. So key for balancing blood sugar is that protein intake.
Yeah, it's amazing because a lot of women just don't realize, they think they're eating enough protein, but when you look at your requirements, and I would say the minimum for most people, unless they have like kidney disease, is going to be like 1 gram per kilogram. And then you might need more if you have a chronic inflammatory condition, because you need the protein to help build your body back up, right? When we are in an inflammatory state, that's actually a catabolic process where our body's breaking itself down. So we actually need a bit more protein. And I would even say to the athlete level, like some of the athletes that are getting 1 gram per pound of body weight, somewhere right in between that 1 gram per kilogram or pound range is where I would recommend for most women with Hashimoto's, they should be somewhere within that range, right?
Preach.
And
yes. I mean, there's so much misinformation out there about inflammation and tying protein intake to inflammation, but it is like exactly what you said. It's a catabolic process. Your body is inflamed. It's breaking itself down. It doesn't have the nutrients it needs to rebuild, to create those hormones, those neurotransmitters, and to really have the healing that it needs. Critical.
Our next guest is Dr. Amy Shah from episode 248. She's a double board certified MD, author and nutritionist focused on gut health, inflammation, and intermittent fasting. She put out an amazing book, I Am So Effing Hungry, this year, detailing her 5-step method for conquering cravings. And that's right where we drop in today.
Our gut bacteria create hunger signals and fullness signals and craving signals and happiness and sad signals. And I think it's really weird to imagine that there's these organisms inside of us that are running the show, but literally they are. And we don't know whether they're running the show in the way, like in friendship with us, or is it just like they're trying to survive themselves? So they're sending the signals that they need to survive. And, but either way, we know that they're more dominating than ours. So their dopamine that they produce is 10 to 100 times stronger than ours. So they can shift the conversation. If they want a certain food or they want you to take a certain action, the signals are stronger than our own, and they can hijack our own signals, which is both fascinating and like scary because we are 40% less diverse in our microbiome than a couple hundred years ago. And that keeps decreasing from the generations because, your child gets your microbiome and you got your parents' microbiome. And as we start to change our food supply, as we start to ingest a lot of antimicrobial foods and use a lot of antimicrobial medications and cleansers, we start to kill our microbiome. And then that starts to affect our mood, our behavior, our cravings. And then we pass it on to our kids. So it's like a huge ignored part of health right now is, hey, guess what? All these things we're doing, so many of them are hurting this very essential part of our immune system, of our hunger wiring, of our happiness. So the hunger part is like when you change your diet, in about 3 days, your gut microbiome changes. And so the hopeful nature of this is in as little as 3 days, you start to have new bacteria in your gut that is going to start to help you make better decisions because they're going to crave good foods. They crave fiber. They crave whole foods. They crave polyphenols like berries and nuts and teas. And so they're going to help you crave the right thing when you start to change it. So the first couple of days might be hard, but then you get help. And so I think that that's kind of the remedy to so many of our issues right now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's amazing to think this symbiotic relationship between our microbes and even our mental health or the way that we feel and what we crave are so connected. I think it takes the shame and the guilt away from a lot of food choices. And it empowers people to know, like, hey, in 3 days, I'm going to see an impact. Are there any negative side effects or things people should expect when they start to move away from those processed foods and into a whole food diet? What's normal?
Yeah, it's very normal to feel like when you eat your first broccoli or cauliflower that you might get some stomach discomfort. Your gut bacteria are not used to it. Your digestion's not used to it. So I always tell people start really slowly. Like leafy greens are a great way to add fiber that's more soluble, that's less irritating to your gut. Like for a lot of people, cauliflower, broccoli has to be very well cooked in very small amounts. Brussels sprouts, same thing. But they're very, very beneficial. Like just because, like on TikTok, you mentioned TikTok, and it really bothers me when I see they'll say foods that will make you should avoid if you're trying to improve your gut health, and they'll say like broccoli and cauliflower, and I'm like, no, but I see what you're saying. Like she or he was saying that it'll bloat you because if you're eating a highly processed diet, you start adding broccoli and cauliflower, you will feel bloated. It takes a lot of gut bacteria and they have a lot of byproducts. But that doesn't mean you should avoid it. Actually, that is a sign that, hey, you probably need to incorporate more fiber and eat those things in small amounts until your body can tolerate it. Like I'm sure you and I can probably tolerate more than someone who had just started eating that. And so you can build up to that. So it's normal to feel a little discomfort. And it's normal to feel like your dopamine is lacking. Like, so what I talk about in the book is a way to retrain your brain to get dopamine from the right sources. So people don't really realize, but exercise is a big producer of dopamine. Sunlight's like the biggest one that you can easily get in a few minutes. Like going for a sunny walk is a great antidote to soothing yourself rather than like scrolling social media or having that junk food. And there are foods actually that bump up your dopamine. And so you can eat those foods, and I have a list of high dopamine foods. Dopamine is created by an amino acid called tyrosine. And if you eat high tyrosine foods, you can get that higher level of dopamine, especially when you're kind of changing your diet and you need a little boost.
So for people that don't know, what is tyrosine? What kind of foods will you find it in?
Yeah, so tyrosine is an amino acid, and a lot of high protein foods will have tyrosine. And so this whole old, advice of eating a high protein breakfast actually goes with this dopamine theory as well, because cottage cheese, yogurt, nuts, all of these things raise your dopamine because they are full of tyrosine. And so I love to start my day with higher dopamine foods because dopamine is very closely related to adrenaline. And that's why we all drink coffee. And that's why because we want that little boost of energy in the morning. So dopamine producing foods are really great, and especially if you're someone who's trying to get yourself off of the negative dopamine sources, this is a great solution for you.
Episode 224 brought the all-around dynamic duo of Dr. Kelly and Juliet Starrett to your podcast feed. Between them, they boast a world of experience, multiple best-selling books, a digital mobility coaching community, the Ready State, global pro sports influence, and truly groundbreaking work in the field of functional physical therapy. Our conversation honed in on prioritizing physical health, even with a busy parenting and work life, leaving us with a great little at-home exercise tip to maintain a strong sense of balance.
One of the things that we start to see is we're talking about how do you create a durable body?
Right.
That means bad stuff's going to happen to you. This morning, this is a definite bouge problem. It's raining. I'm walking out to turn on the sauna early. Maybe our geriatric cat is screaming at us at 5:45. And I'm like, well, might as well turn on the sauna. And Juliet's like, do it. So I walk out and I trip and my left foot slips into the pool. And I go down so hard onto the concrete. Like the worst case scenario, I'm blind, I don't have coffee, I'm freezing in my underwear outside, and I trip on the concrete. Bad things are going to happen to you. You're going to get disease, you're going to get injured, something is coming your way. And we want to create as much capacity to buffer that as we can. Simultaneously, if I think we are looking at creating a good business, you would say, hey, here's my quarterly goal, or here's my year-end goal, and here's my 5-year goal. And you would work backwards. We do it with savings and retirement, but we don't do it with thinking about how we want our bodies to move. We always think that that future version of ourselves is going to be more motivated and have more time, right? They'll have better discipline. I'm going to eat this cake, but tomorrow I won't want the cake. I know that's the case. So one of the things that we can do is start to say, well, where are the big roadblocks for a lot of people? And what we start to see is balance goes down. Fall risk when you're in your 70s is the number one way to kill yourself. You fall, you break your hip, you lose your ability to move, you lose muscle mass because you're in the hospital.
You can't live independently.
You can't live independently. You don't see your friends. It's gnarly. So if getting up and down off the ground, if fall risk, if balance are those things, well, how then, as a 50-year-old man who loves to train hard, where do I put this foot strength, balance, awareness into my day-to-day life so that you don't say to me, well, Kel, I think you need to go take a 1-hour balance class. I'm like, no, I'm going to go deadlift and sprint. Like that's way more interesting to me. But I need to be thinking about having some benchmarks in this, and some like, holy moly, my ankles were stiff and I didn't know, and I couldn't do this. So where can we do those things? That really is the magic. And a simple test, for example, is we love this thing called the Old Man Balance Test, developed by our friend Chris Henshaw. And he developed this test so he could beat his kids at something.
Okay.
And all I want you to do, and again, one of the things that Juliet and I are really trying to do, and we've become much more realists of, is and I learned this early on, you'll like this from the biohacking days. I think early on, I was like, Juliet, look, here's a list of 20 things we can do to optimize and biohack. And she's like, I'm a busy working mother. Like, you can just go to hell with that list of like things I need to do. I'm never going to get that done. Are you adding 20 more things to my, right?
Yeah.
But it turns out one of the things you'll do every day is put your shoes on. You'll put your shoes and socks on. You will do that. And so all we want you to do is stand on one foot and then not put the other foot down. Reach down, grab a sock. Don't put your foot down, put the sock on. Reach down, grab your shoe. Don't put your foot down, put your shoe on. You've just engaged in over a minute of gnarly dynamic balance training that you can do every single time you put your shoes and socks on. And then guess what? Rinse, wash, repeat a decade, and you'll slay it.
I mean, this is the kind of stuff where it becomes a trigger and a habit and something that you do. And like,
and your kids can
blink 10 years later. Yeah.
You don't have to go to a balance class.
I mean, I literally I put my shoes and socks on using the Old Man Balance Test every single day. Like Kelly, actually, I was in the garage and he's like, oh, look at you doing the Old Man Balance Test. But I do it every day now. It's just like become the way I put on my shoe. I'm like, oh, this is how I do it. And, usually sometimes that's even twice a day, right? Because if I exercise and change, so it's like, I've gotten like 3 minutes of balance practice in and I didn't have to go to a balance class.
All right, I promise I'm going to do it for like the next 6 weeks. But then when the belly's too big, I might just have to tap out, sit down, or have Chris tie my shoes for me.
You get a pass. You get a pass in like the second and third trimester of pregnancy.
For sure. If you take any of these practices and then just turn and look at your kids and say, whoa, are my kids able to do these practices? I think we can start to pick up things early on and then adjust, because I think the problem is we get this mission creep as parents and as busy working entrepreneurs where you're just like, I'm doing it, I'm surviving, and my body's so durable, I'm getting by.
Right.
One of the reasons when we're working with people with back pain or chronic pain or persistent pain or after surgery, we make them track their sleep because we don't believe that they're actually doing what they say they're doing. And it's so easy to get this sleep now. And then as soon as they start tracking, they start making different decisions because what gets measured gets managed. So early on with some of these tests, we found out that if we could just bring them to consciousness and then people could apply them, lo and behold, we saw that they ended up doing the right thing.
Rounding out today's episode, we have Rachael DeVaux, my good friend and the brains behind Rachel's Good Eats. She's also a registered dietitian, personal trainer, and Instagram superstar. She joined me on episode 247 to bring our lessons to the kitchen, sharing her whole food philosophy and favorite diet tips.
look, I went through my fair share of testing different diets. I think it was during college and I guess after college, but I counted macros for a few months. It was way too stressful and, way too much and overwhelming. So I stopped that. I did high carb. I did a little vegetarian. I took fat burners for a while just because I wasn't happy with how my body was looking and there was no effect on those. So, I've done my own experiments and finding out what works. And so everyone goes through their own journey to do that. So don't think just because you don't feel your best right now, that's just how it has to be in life. Keep trying because everyone's diet in how they perform and their energy levels is so different. So just keep trying to experiment with that and find out what works. Try to eliminate certain things for a time.
I was just curious if you currently track anything because it's
okay.
Your history has a lot. I feel like so many people that have been on a health journey.
Yeah.
That's what you do. You're like, I'm going to follow this for a while. I'm going to follow that for a while. I'm going to go get tested from a doctor. I'm going to try this health modality. Oh gosh, back in the beginning of my career, it was every other corner in LA was a colonic place. And I'm like, everyone's putting a garden hose up their booty. What is happening? And fast forward to 2023. And I have clients texting, calling, emailing me about semaglutide. And they want to know, should they be taking Trulicity or diabetes medications for weight loss? I think everyone needs to go through that process of going and trying something, and you may take something from it. And I've figured this out along the way because I care about how I feel. I care about my health and my fitness. And I think as people hone in on what works for them, sometimes I see clients and or, experts, influencers get to a point where they're like, what really made a difference to me is when I started tracking this. I do really make sure I hit this protein amount per day, or I do really make sure that I don't go more than 48 hours without lifting weights, or I do,
Okay.
I non-negotiable is sleep. What are your non-negotiables? And as an expert, how have you really honed yourself to that expert level?
I definitely focus on protein intake. I've just seen a huge transformation in my physical fitness and how my body looks and how I've gained lean muscle mass.
Heck yeah, we've seen it too, Rach.
That's
you
so
look
nice.
Great.
Oh, thank you. I definitely make protein the main part of my meals, and I also include it in snacks. So if I'm going to have, a sliced up apple, I'm including peanut butter or almond butter with that. I think people oftentimes can make a mistake of just having, carbohydrate heavy fruit or, chips, and they don't include a healthy fat or a protein with it to help balance your blood sugar.
Yeah.
Which I know is speaking to your soul right now, but
my heart is happy
because it teaches you to cook, for yourself. It teaches you to eat whole foods. I think those diets that are just packaged items, that are X amount of calories that you just put in the microwave, that's not teaching you shit. It's you're not learning one single thing from that just by putting something in the microwave. You're not learning about ingredients. You're not, you're just focusing on the numbers, which I think people get so messed up with. I focus on how I feel, how satiated I am after a meal. I don't want to be hungry an hour or two after my meal. So I need to eat enough protein to where I can stay full for a few hours. And then about a fourth of my plate is complex carbs, especially with weight training. I do need that. I feel so much better with it. I think there was a time where I was trying to exclude it, but I feel so much more energized with it. And my body seems to agree when I include that too. So yeah, just experimenting, finding out what works for you is huge.
I love that. No, and absolutely when you're training the way that you're training and you're having a meal that has a substantial amount of protein, that's not going to make a huge impact on your blood sugar because your muscles are hungry for that glucose and you're pairing it with a protein and it's keeping you full and elongating that blood sugar curve over time, which I think is a major standout, but people bucket things good or bad, but we're talking about whole foods, complex carbohydrates paired with a solid protein in a meal and not a bunch of mindless packaged carbohydrate snacking between meals. It's a completely different mindset and style of eating, and gives you so much freedom, which I think is really, really cool.
Big shout out to Dr. Jolene Brighten, Dr. Stephanie Estima, Dr. Izabella Wentz, Dr. Amy Shah, Dr. Kelly Starrett, Juliet Starrett, Rachael DeVaux, and all of my guests from 2023. And a big shout out again to you for being an important part of the show, and as a result, my life too. I can't wait for you to hear what we have planned for next year.